Girl's Best Friend by Jordan Wippell. Narrated by Sharon Bolman. Delilah thumbs at the small golden cross hanging around her pale neck. She stares down at a creased piece of notebook paper and studies it suspiciously. On the page is a messy list of hand-scribbled directions that Delilah can only assume were written in a hurry. Each of the 10 step-by-step instructions lead deeper and deeper into the dense forest behind the town's little wooden church. However, the only part of the note that seems of interest to Delilah is the large word scrawled at the bottom of the page: treasure. "Why do I have to come?" Delilah's younger sister Elizabeth blurts out. "Why couldn't you bring Sam instead?" Delilah shoots her a familiar glare and grabs Elizabeth's arm, yanking her towards the pillared tree trunks of the forest entrance. Normally, she wouldn't bring her sister on such an endeavor, but Delilah knew her father would be disappointed if she left Elizabeth on her own. The two walk at a hurried pace down the faint dirt path. Being the younger, Elizabeth struggles to keep up, flinching at every twig snap and leafy caress. Although the woods seemed as familiar a place as any in their quaint township, Elizabeth didn't share her sister's love for adventure, nor did she enjoy the thought of becoming lost. As they walk, Delilah readjusts the shoulder strap of the brown satchel hanging down around her side. When gifted to her, the bag was intended to house psalm and prayer-related study books, but Delilah had often filled it with her favorite paperbacks instead. She liked the way the various books made the bag bulge at the seams, as if all her favorite stories were ready to break out and assist her whenever she needed. Delilah abruptly freezes in place and looks back down at the note. Not noticing the sudden change in velocity, her younger sister rams into her back. "Ow! Watch it!" Delilah exclaims as she shoves her little sister's shoulder in retaliation. "I'm going to tell Dad that you skipped Bible study to play with boys," Elizabeth threatens as she crosses her arms and stamps her foot in tantrum. Delilah ignores her sister's warning and continues to walk ahead, further into the trees. "This way," she states firmly. Elizabeth's feet stay planted on the ground in protest. They only shift once she realizes the increasing distance between herself and her older sister. Letting out a frustrated huff of air, she runs to catch up. The two girls come to a small clearing with a thick tree stump at the center. Golden sunlight twinkles through the gaps between the leaves and creates vibrant flecks that dance across the ground. Delilah vaguely recalls her parents bringing her here for a picnic sometime before Elizabeth was born. However, she is unsure if this is the spot she remembers. Next to the dead stump, Delilah notices a small, freshly dug pile of dirt. After quickly surveying the area, she walks over to inspect the heap. Checking the written directions one final time, Delilah concludes that this is indeed where the treasure must be buried. She scrunches up the piece of paper and stuffs it into the side pocket of her satchel. "This place smells gross," Elizabeth whines, covering her nose with her sleeve and leaning up against a tall tree trunk. Delilah kneels down and plunges her hands into the fresh dirt. The cool, soggy sensation of the soil reminds her of post-church gardening with her mother. The two spent many weekends constructing a gardening box and growing vegetables under the Granny Smith apple tree in their small backyard. It was here that Delilah gained what her mother called a mature appreciation of God's green earth. She continues excavating small handfuls of dirt to the edge of the hole with a distant nostalgia. Her heart starts to race as each placid scoop brings the destined treasure ever closer. Elizabeth, distracted by the various woodland sounds, becomes paranoid. She glances around the thick flora and notices a quick flash of bright red disappear behind a tree in the distance. "Delilah, I'm scared. I want to go back," she says with a nervous crackle in her voice. Delilah continues digging into the pile with credulous determination until her hands touch something soft and moist. She glides her slender fingers across the top of the warm shape, removing another layer of dirt. From underneath, Delilah is assaulted with a revolting stench of what smells like rotten meat. The odor delivers an electric shock to her senses, and she gags as the inhale of her gasp carries the thick fumes into the bottom of her lungs. She desperately covers her mouth to block the reek while looking down at the white tufts of tangled hair that now protrude through the mushy earth. Unaware of her sister's discovery, Elizabeth's anxious eyes wander the surrounding woods. She shivers as the sound of snapping twigs echoes subtly around her. Mustering as much courage as she can, Elizabeth alerts her sister of the threat. "Delilah, I think there's somebody in the trees," she says with a loud gulp. Infatuated with her morbid unearthing, Delilah gradually removes her hand from her mouth and takes small breaths in order to acclimatize her body to the smell. She reaches down slowly and plunges in once again. Her fingers puncture through the loose soil until they come in contact with a warm, wet liquid that sends a quiver speeding up Delilah's spine. She pulls her hand back in a panic and stares down at the red, dirt-speckled fluid coating her forefinger. Assuming the damp content is most likely blood, Delilah's body becomes tense with grisly anticipation. Acting on a strange inclination, she shoves both her hands back into the mound once more and pulls at the tiny corpse. Her tugging causes the body of a small, spotted Jack Russell Terrier to rise up through the muck. The dark, blood-stained fur leads to a violent gash that exposes the inside flesh of the poor dog's neck. Its pink, swollen tongue hangs loosely from the mouth, over which its left eye bulges unnaturally from the socket. The dead stare of the brown, ellipsoid pupil shatters the stained glass windows of Delilah's virgin eyes and fills her mind with images of fiery lakes, gnashing teeth, and other ingrained incarnations of hell. Panicked and overcome with terror, she falls backwards onto the ground, struck with overwhelming nausea. "Lizzie, don't come over here," Delilah cautions. At the same moment, the rustling of the trees grows louder, and without warning, several of the neighborhood boys jump from behind each trunk with twisted faces and animalistic growls. Elizabeth lets out a mighty squeal and rushes towards her sister. The two girls cower to the ground and cling to one another, shell-shocked. The group of young boys howl a thunderous bellow of wicked laughter and begin to dance around their victims. "If you go out in the woods today, you're in for a big surprise," the group of boys chant in pre-planned synchronization. Delilah immediately realizes the cruel prank that has been played against her. When she found the note at the community church, a little voice in the back of her head, or perhaps the voice of God, had told her something was off. Frustrated with her own self-doubt, Delilah grows grim with rage and rises to her feet. She helps up her younger sister and proceeds to brush off her own stained jeans with rigid, aggravated movements. Delilah repositions her satchel as Elizabeth shields herself, peeking out from behind the safety of her sister. "Do you like our treasure, Lizzie?" the red shirt-wearing leader mocks, pointing down at the bloody hound. "You should have seen you guys' faces." Delilah remains unamused and slightly shaken from the treasure revelation. She takes a sure step forward as if to challenge her opponent. "Whoa, calm down, Lila. It's just a silly prank," the larger freckled boy remarks with a chuckle. Delilah wasn't familiar with the names of the two younger boys, but she knew their obnoxious leader, Daniel Davali. He was known around town for his constant misbehavior, and this wasn't the first time Delilah had encountered him. "Who killed him?" Delilah questioned sternly, now gaining back some of her courage. We didn't kill it," the pale, skinny kid utters nervously. "We found it like this." Delilah takes another threatening step forward. "What if we did kill it?" interrupts the leader of the group. "What are you girls going to do about it?" He smirks. Delilah pauses for a moment of contemplation. Although her instincts differ from the values her father instilled in her, she can't help but give in to a challenge. She rushes the young boy with a few quick steps and clutches at the edges of her bag. Using the weight of the books inside, Delilah swings the satchel up and socks her adversary in the nose with a brutal force she didn't know she had. The pressure of the impact causes the bag to burst open, and Delilah's favorite books flutter to the ground around her like wounded doves. The boy lets out an ear-piercing wail and falls to the dirt with a heavy thunk. Silver tears trickle down his blushed cheeks as he rolls in the muck, gripping at his face. The rest of the posse looks on, dumbfounded, before jumping into action-ready stances. Breathing heavy, Delilah glares around at the remaining boys with a hellish scowl. Are you okay, Danny?" the freckled child asks his wounded leader apprehensively.
"Yes."
His irate, muffled voice responds from behind his hands. Danny sniffs loudly, wipes his face, and begins to pick himself up off the ground in hopes to recover from his humiliation. "Stay there," barks Delilah before he has a chance to move. Danny, not prone to obeying orders, somehow senses a seriousness in her tone and keeps still. Delilah points at the short, skinny kid with her blood-covered finger. "You," she points towards the deceased animal. "Bury it." Delilah can clearly sense the boy's fearful trepidation, and it takes him a brief moment before scrambling toward the hole. In his mad dash, he trips slightly on one of the open books and lands in front of the still canine. Using the bottom part of his shirt, he pushes the dog back into its resting place. "Gently," Delilah orders. Elizabeth's puzzled gaze stays on Delilah as she tries to decipher her sister's actions. The skinny boy quickly brushes the residual soil back over the lifeless pet and stands at attention. "Delilah?" Elizabeth asks, perplexed. "What are you doing?" Delilah ignores her sister and walks over to the freshly bruised leader. She drops her broken satchel and grabs Danny's wrist tightly. He jerks back in response to her touch. "Stay away from me, crazy bitch," he mutters under his breath. Delilah pulls the boy up onto his knees. "I want everyone to copy Danny," Delilah shouts, her demand echoing through the trees. The two remaining boys look at each other anxiously before dropping to the ground. The skinny child shivers with terror beside his now sobbing comrade. "You too, Lizzie," Delilah politely asks her sister with an assured smile. Elizabeth warily places her knees down on the earth, as does Delilah. The children encircle the newly departed pet. Surrounding them sit the myriad of Delilah's sporadically scattered open and closed books. Delilah clasps her hands in front of her face and closes her eyes. Elizabeth observes her sister's movements, and she too follows suit. Delilah gives the neighborhood boys a final menacing glance. They place their hands together and avert their gazes without delay. The woods fall silent. All that can be heard is the quiet flickering of storybook pages in the wind, the distant barking of neighborhood dogs, and the benevolent rustling of the towering trees above. With her head hung low, Delilah begins to mumble quietly as each child remains eerily still. "Dearest God, Heavenly Father, maker of all living creatures." Before she has time to finish her sentence, Delilah's concentration is broken by the pitter-patter of footsteps in the dirt. She opens her eyes to see the three boys flee the clearing and disappear into the distant woods. Delilah looks across to her little sister, who is now staring directly at the abused grave for the first time. Her heartbroken expression is similar to the one Delilah spent many nights consoling after their mother left. "Samson?" Elizabeth whispers as tears well in the corners of her innocent blue eyes. Delilah nods slightly in reassurance. With one hand, she reaches out to comfort her sister's trembling palms. With the other, she thumbs the small cross that hangs gently around her neck, the now dried blood smudging against the white gold. She continues her prayer. "We ask you to bless our Samson, who brought so much joy into our lives."